This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I'm Jim Harold. So glad to be with you once again. And this idea of living in a haunted house, what is it really like? Well, we're going to have a story that's actually gained a great deal of renown on the internet and elsewhere. Our guest today is Edwin Becker. His book on Kindle is, and also available, I guess, on hardcover and paperback, is True Haunting. And it's his true story of living in a haunted house. It's been featured on Paranormal Witness, and his book is number one as I look here on the Kindle store under parapsychology. So congratulations for that. Edwin is a bit of a Renaissance man. He's been a musician. He's worked in the computer industry. He has a large number of hobbies, including music and so forth. And he's been writing for decades and has really kind of hit the market well with this latest release. It's very, very popular. And as I said, the story that we're going to talk about today has been featured on Paranormal Witness, that great show that's on Sci-Fi. And we're so glad to have him with us today. Edwin Becker, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Harold. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you. We talked a little bit, and we kind of said what took me so long to get to you, and I'm glad that we finally did. Now, let's make it clear. This is a story back in 1970, 1971. So that's the time frame that we're talking about. Kind of talk to me about Edwin at that. What stage of life were you at, and what was kind of your place in life leading up to buying that house?
Well, my wife was pregnant, and in those days, landlords could basically dictate what they wanted, and most of them didn't want children or pets. So our landlady told us that we had to get out. I was sort of an apprentice in the computer industry, just learning my craft. There weren't many computers really in those days. We didn't have a lot of money, and I went looking for a place to live. After months of hunting for an apartment and not being successful, I found an old house in a changing neighborhood that was an heir estate, which kind of meant that the person who, because of a reason of the person dying, that they were selling it. And I had in my mind that I didn't have the 20% down, but I felt that maybe they'd sell it on contract. So right. I went to look at it.
So you went to look at the house. What were your impressions? I mean, was it solely a price thing? Did the house seem to have a personality, a charm? Why did you decide to pull the trigger on the deal?
Well, I didn't have any other alternatives, number one. The house certainly had no charm whatsoever. I saw it as what it could be. I mean, a lot of fixing and a lot of paint, even though in those years there was no Home Depots or self-help places. You sort of had to do things the hard way. And I was not a believer in paranormal, so I didn't believe in paranormal whatsoever. I looked at it, and Paranormal Witness had it correct. When the real estate man and I walked in the front door, we were greeted by this old woman. And if you saw Paranormal Witness and you saw what the old woman, how she was portrayed, she was huggable compared to the real thing. The real woman that came out had filthy hair. She had a poodle on her arm, cradled like a baby, that was biting at her hair like it was biting at fleas. And, I mean, she started screaming profanities at us. It shook me up completely as a young man. The real estate man started screaming back at her in profanities, and I just stood there in awe because I was taught that number one, you respect your elders, number two, you don't talk to women like that.
Right.
But once we got past her, we went through this place, and being a total non-believer, I felt many of the signs that everybody today, finds common. The problem is I just didn't recognize them. And I led a checkered youth in that I bounced back and forth between my mother and my father. I was taken away, and I lived in an orphanage for about 4 years. I traveled on the road as a musician, so I didn't have a feeling of home per se.
Right.
Feeling uncomfortable was was normal to me. So I paid no attention. I was completely ignorant of the place. In fact, I interpreted there were a couple of rare, very, very cool rooms that I interpreted as being a good thing, because in a hot July day on the second floor, I don't need to buy air conditioning.
Right, you have natural shade or whatever cooling the room, or a draft or whatever that helped you out with that. Now you were a very you were a young man at that point. Now did the house, were you aware of any reputation of the house prior to purchasing it? Did the real estate agent let on? Had you heard anything? Of course, we've got to remember, I was just that's a couple of years after I was born, but the paranormal wasn't top of mind like it is now with all these programs and so forth. But did you have any inkling going in that this place had any kind of reputation like this?
None whatsoever, and honestly, I didn't care. It was sort of like if I could get a place to live, I was going to be grateful, because my wife and I were kind of desperate. And in those years, we didn't have any means to look anything up. If you wanted a record, you had to go down to City Hall, drive downtown. They only worked when you worked, so you had to take time off of work. You had to pay fees. You had to wait for them to get the records. I had no desire to do any of that, and I really didn't care. Here I am in a neighborhood of houses that are, at the time, now they're over 100 years old, but at the time they're 70, 80 years old, where people held funerals in the front room in those years, early on. And so I kind of knew what I was getting into, but I just didn't believe in ghosts. If people today maybe think it's silly, but in 1970, we had Casper the Friendly Ghost, we had Topper, we had the Cannibal Ghost. The Cannibal Ghost was funny, and the Ghost of Mrs. Muir was romantic. We didn't have any scary ghosts. So, as a non-believer, ghosts didn't mean anything to me. It had no meaning whatsoever. Now, when we moved,
go ahead.
When we moved in, my wife was sensitive, and she felt that it was uncomfortable. And in fact, when I showed her the basement, immediately she took a step in, she stepped right out, and she said, "No, I'm not coming down here." And I had all intentions of making that the laundry room. And so I had to change the whole thing and put a dryer on the back porch for her, and she would not go in the basement. Now, I thought it was all dumb. I didn't say anything wrong. Yeah, I got a few chills, but it was like I had slept in basements before. I'd been in worse places. Okay.
Right. Well, when we get back from this break, I want to talk to you about when you started to realize, hey, there's something going on here. We will be right back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Edwin F. Becker. He is the author of the book, True Haunting, right after this on the Paranormal Podcast. Did we have a good time last week? We had an online course with Michelle Belanger, Lucid Dreaming in the Paranormal, part 1 of a 2-part class. It was a full hour-long class. She answered questions from the audience, and she put up a PowerPoint and went through her points. Very erudite, very insightful. And I hope that you got to access it. Now, the way you access it is you go over to jimharold.net, and if you're a member, you log in and you can see the video archive if you actually missed the first part of it, and you can sign up for part 2 in February. Now, you notice there's a disclaimer there. If you are a member of my Paranormal Plus Club, and that's why I'd like you to take a serious look at it. Our Paranormal Plus Club, hundreds of podcast episodes. We've got exclusive episodes you've never heard if you're not a member. I've got my Conspiracy Corner show, my UFO Encounter show, my Other Side show. Just a ton of content there, and we so much hope that you'll be a part of it. Check it out over at jimharold.net. We're about a month away from the 2-year anniversary of the Plus Club, and I'm so thankful. We have almost 700 members. I've really been wanting to get to 1,000 members. I think that's just, a baseline I've been looking at, and it's been a little slower than I'd like, to be honest, but very thankful for the 700 or so people who have signed up, and we really appreciate it. We hope you'll decide to join, and that's why we wanted to give you a special offer. This is only good for the first 200 people who sign up, and it's only good through the end of February, whichever one comes first. If we hit 200 before, we'll close the deal. If it goes to the end of February, we'll close it then. But basically, here is the premise. You sign up for a year, which is usually $79.50, which is already a savings, considerable savings off of the monthly price. On top of it, if you use the coupon code PARTY as part of this special deal, you get $21 off. That's $21 off. And for that $58.50, you get a year of access. That includes all of the paranormal courses. That includes the hundreds of episodes you cannot access if you're not a member. That includes the great forums that we have. That includes the meet and greet that I do on a regular basis. I have one actually coming up this next week as part of the club. And it includes the great forums where we have a lot of great community. It's growing all the time. We want you to be a part of it. It's the Paranormal Plus Club over at jimharold.net. You use that coupon code PARTY, one of the first 200, to do so. And you can get $21 off of that yearly price, already money-saving yearly price, $58.50 for all the paranormal content you can eat. Think about that. $58.50 with that coupon code PARTY. You break that down, that's a pretty economical look at it. I'm thinking that's less than $5 a month. That's one latte at the local high-priced coffee store, or it's less than that. So hopefully you'll check it out. It's what allows me to do this full time. It's what allows me to do new shows and new experiences and always try to improve on the sound that we have and give you better content. Really, the Paranormal Plus Club is what makes this whole thing go. And I hope you'll become a part of it. I'd love to hit that 1,000 number where, as I said, at 700 now. We'd love to hit 1,000. We'd love to hit 1,000 before the year anniversary. We thank you so much for listening. I hope that you continue to enjoy the free programs, but I hope you'll be able to really dig in over the Paranormal Plus Club. It's at jimharold.net, and thank you for listening.
Can't get enough paranormal content? Sign up for monthly webinars, newsletters, and more shows. Join the Paranormal Plus Club at jimharold.net. Now back to the Paranormal Podcast.
The subject is true haunting, a real-life haunting. The person who lived it is our guest, Edwin F. Becker. He's the author of True Haunting. And again, as I said before, subject of a story that's been on Paranormal Witness on the Sci-Fi Channel, a best-selling book, #1 best-selling book in its category on the Kindle and parapsychology. It is True Haunting. And Edwin, you made it very clear going into this house, you were just thankful to have a place to stay. Your wife was pregnant. You were kind of a little bit at loose ends in terms of having a place to live because of the climate back then with landlords and so forth. So it's like, this is a house, this is a roof over our head. I am grateful for it. Give us the experience or the experiences that started to turn you around and say, there's something really sinister about this place.
Well, my wife realized it long before I did. Okay, so I was just ignorant, completely ignorant of anything. And then I think, like many people, you go through an awareness where you start to question, did I leave that door open? Didn't I pull a wall on the dresser? And then you rationalize it. You say, well, yeah, I probably did leave the door open, or my wife left the door open. And I went for a couple months like that until really it started to create friction. I mean, it's one thing that these things do is they create friction between families or spouses. So I started to blame my wife almost for everything. I mean, one of the phenomena we had was the phone coming off the hook. And I'd try to call home, and it would be busy. And I'd come home, and I'd get upset with my wife for being on the phone all day. And when we got the bill, there was no calls. In those years, the phones were expensive. You couldn't own one. You couldn't own one. You had to lease it.
Yeah.
It was against federal law to own one. And you got billed for every single unit. So when there was no billing and the phone was off the hook, of course, I rationalized it. I said, well, the cat or the dog knocked it off. And I was writing things off and going through denial until I realized what it was doing. And in my case, it had a thing about pulling the plug out of my bathtub when I ran my bathtub water in the morning. We had no shower. And it would wrap it around the faucet. And where I'd normally start my bath and then go in the kitchen and my wife and I would talk and have coffee, I started because it would do this and I'd have to take a cold bath. I got upset and I started taking my coffee. Now I'm sitting in the bathroom watching my bathtub. We're no longer having this pleasant conversation. You know, I come home and the phone's off the hook and I wasn't able to reach home, so now I'm mad at my wife for that. Then you find things displaced. We were laughing the other night because I used to sit on the couch if I had time and read the paper.
Right.
On the coffee table there. And I would smoke a cigarette and I would touch the ashtray and put my ashes in the ashtray. And the ashtray would slide right off the table, right in front of my eyes.
Huh.
So I actually accused my wife in those days because the aerosol cans were so big and she bought lemon wax. I told her, quit putting so much darn wax on the table. You know, that I was blaming. If you're a non-believer, you tend not to believe anything, and it wasn't until I started to be able to realize what was happening to me and that I was just ignoring things that I had no explanation for. And Paranormal Witness had it correct, that I found a shed, which was like a storage locker, full of early pornography and full of things that weren't really even pornographic, that this person cut out in little clippings. I'm talking thousands.
Wow.
Stacked in, rubber banded neatly and stacked in shoeboxes. I don't know how many thousand there would have been there. But some of them were even innocent, but he would cut out a body part and he would put it on there. And his name was written all over everything, so I started addressing him, which was, you know, for you, anybody listening, you don't want to do that. And,
now, this was someone that you knew lived in the house previously.
Correct. Now,
and I assume he was deceased, obviously.
Yeah, and you know, considering we never got to be formally introduced, I could never be sure what it was that was reacting. But I started calling him, and if anything went wrong, I'd say, Ben, you SOB, you know, what the heck did you do this for? Ben, why the hell did you, leave this so filthy? Why didn't you clean up this mess?
Right.
If something went wrong, I'd blame Ben. And I started getting responses. And as a young, non-believing man who grew up in inner city of Chicago, I mean, I actually lived in Cabrini Green for a period. I wasn't afraid of ghosts. I was afraid of people. People
right.
that can harm you.
Sure.
Even tonight, I'm not worried about a ghost coming through the front door. I'm worried about a meth addict or something.
Right.
So I'd make fun of him. I'd antagonize him. My wife would scold me. We actually had, hard feelings, and eventually she went home to her mom for a while and had to get out of there. And it just became to where all of a sudden I realized it's ruining our life.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I went to seek help. And unlike today, where you can go to a website and find maybe 100 societies in every state of investigators or healers, we had nothing that if you brought up the word ghost, people just laughed at you. They mocked you. So it's something you didn't want to talk about. My wife flippantly, I flippantly said to her, she said, what are we going to do to get help? And we had tried the Catholic Church, and that's one scene in Paranormal Witness. They had correct, but they had way more witnesses than it showed my wife and I, and really we had a dozen family members there
right.
when it happened. And that priest ran off and never came back. He would not come back. Him and I had words. And so I was out of resource.
Now, for folks who haven't seen Paranormal Witness, what happened that frightened or angered the priest? What specifically happened?
The day, I was still a bit of a non-believer at the time this happened. My daughter was christened, and we invited the priest to our house to bless the building and to have a buffet lunch with us. And I had family and friends there. And first, when he walked up the stairs, he was greeted by Myra, who started screaming filthy profanities at him. And then he came upstairs, and I apologized for her. I got her back in her apartment, He came upstairs.
Now, Myra, let's be clear. Who is Myra?
Myra was a family member. She was the last family member to live in the building.
Was that the same woman that greeted you with the dirty hair and all of that?
Yes, and I had agreed. I had agreed when I bought the building to allow her to stay for 90 days because they couldn't find a place for her.
Okay.
So
I just wanted to make that. I just wanted to make that clear for everybody listening.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, for the whole time I lived there, while she was there, we would always hold our breath as we passed her door to make sure she wasn't going to pop out and start screaming. But she screamed at the priest, and he came in, and I was brought up Catholic, and so I was Catholic at that time. I knew what a house blessing was, and a priest would go from room to room, and sometimes they'd leave you with a crucifix. He came in, and he started in the living room, which was typical, and he raised up his holy water dispenser, which was brass, and it just shattered. I mean, everybody was dumbfounded, and of course, nobody's thinking ghosts. We were thinking, what the hell happened?
Right.
He got down, he picked up all the pieces, and then he tried to leave, and I said, no, you have to bless my daughter's room. So I actually grabbed him by the collar, and I said, bless my daughter's room. So he blessed my daughter's room, put on his coat, and it was comical at the time. I mean, our front door and our closet door were next to each other, and they both looked identical, other than the doorknobs being on different sides. He walked in the closet, and everybody started giggling, all my friends, and then he went down the stairs, and I had to chase him to give him a church donation. But he refused to come back. Him and I had a number of clashes. I didn't put them all in the book, and I certainly didn't write how ugly they really were. But we had no resource, and my wife said, what are we going to do? And I said, read the Yellow Pages, for lack of anything else.
Right.
Well, lo and behold, she finds two listings under, I don't think the word was paranormal research, but it was under psychic research maybe. The first group that came they were just scammers. They came in and they performed a ceremony, a kumbaya, oh, great spirits, leave this house.
Right.
And they were of no use whatsoever. The second group came in, and they were more, Tom Valentine was an author who had just written a book for Joseph DeLuise, a psychic. Mm-hmm. Tom came in and he wanted to investigate us, which kind of told me that they were more serious.
Right.
So he did investigate us as people and our habits and where I worked and what I did and what our belief system was. Then he brought in some people to investigate the house. Was I doing anything that would create these things?
Right.
Setting them up, sort of. And then finally, they brought in two psychics. They brought in Joseph DeLuise and a female psychic that I never met again. But they went through the house, and they went through it slowly. And at first, I sort of laughed because I'm still on this borderline of, you don't understand paranormal. I didn't understand it, and all I knew is these are mind readers. That's all I knew. But when they read me, this woman, they walked in the house and our dining room was empty. And the psychic looks in the dining room and he says, well, you don't use this room much. I'm thinking, well, an empty room, no furniture, that's real psychic, He then looks at our bedroom and we're the only adults in the house. He sees the bedding in there and everything. He says, well, that's your bedroom. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, this guy's really psychic. Then the woman looks at me, and she grabs my hand, and she says, bullets. Huh. And it went through me like a lightning bolt. I said, bullets? And she said, you have bullets. And this was not in the forefront of my mind. It was a jar of bullets I had found in the basement, and I put them on top of a rafter in the attic.
Right.
Forgot about them. Didn't tell my wife about them. I didn't want to throw them away because I felt in Chicago they burned the garbage. I figured they'd explode, maybe hurt somebody. So she said, they're above the rafter in your basement. And I said, you're correct. And from there on in, I was a believer. She They went through the house and they found multiple spirits. And the psychic, Joseph DeLuise, said that something on the first floor, he said he wasn't sure what it was. And what he did, without telling me, is he went after an exorcist. And the first person he went to was a Father Joe Wood, who had he was a Catholic priest, who had an NBC radio station program. And Father Wood refused, but he recommended a exorcist from the Church of England, Reverend William Darrell Davis. So the next thing I knew is that Joseph DeLuise and the exorcist returned, and they said, can we have the house for one night? Everybody out. And so we did that. And when we returned that night, they looked very, very bothered. But they said, we're going to exorcise this house. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea what exercise meant. But I said, okay, then days or a week later, they called and they asked if Carol Simpson, who was one of the premier reporters in Chicago.
Oh, yeah, Carol Simpson, yeah. And she was on National for years. I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, she was actually the first, I think, black woman anchor nationally. But she called and she said that could they film it? And I had kind of assumed that either Father Joe Wood or Joseph DeLuise was asking. I couldn't return them down because they weren't asking me for any money. They were doing this all out of kindness, even though I did not want the exposure, because everywhere you looked, I mean, there were just skeptics and people would make fun of you. So I didn't want to have my face plastered on television and be the laugh of the city. But I said yes. And they did the exorcism, and it lasted about 3 hours, actually. And I have to admit that the piece they did on TV was not bad for that time. They did it seriously, and it failed. I mean, there was no doubt. Not only did it fail, it was like they stirred up a hornet's nest. We had more activity afterward than we did prior.
Was there a time that it really... It sounded like it was kind of annoying you, kind of moving things around. Was there a time it actually frightened you?
Yes. When it started playing with the utilities, which was late in our stay, and the electricity, I never talked to my first floor tenant, Dan. We were at a landlord-tenant relationship. 40 years later on the Paranormal Witness site, shooting, him and I had a reunion. What went on in his apartment, makes my book incomplete. There should be 2 more chapters. What he told me just shocked my wife and I. We never knew that his wife was tormented. We never knew his wife left him. But I knew it was playing with my electricity on and off. It was also playing with his electricity. And then when it hit the gas and started to turn the gas off, these were old valves. These were old lever valves where you turn it one way and you're on, you turn it the other way.
Yeah.
Not easily turned, and they were up in the attic. And once it started doing that, I became afraid for my family. And I started cursing, and I really do believe that my feeling in the end was just outrage. It turned me into a very angry young man. I was agitated at all times. You know this thing is there. You can't see it. You cannot estimate its power. You don't know what it'll do next. I know it was capable of moving things.
Right.
We had no doubt of that. We had seen a solid apparition, and even though it wasn't a scary one, it was an old woman. And when you see a solid apparition, it changes your life. Because you see something that you can't believe your eyes.
Right.
You know it's not real. But it appears real. And then you start to wonder about, even to this very day, if we're out and there's a crowd of people, I look at that crowd of people and I wonder is there 40 people there or is there 39?
Right.
That's how it affects your mind. And when we're driving along the road and I see somebody walking out in the wilderness, I look in my rearview mirror, is it still there,
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that it was ruining our marriage. I kind of attributed most of the activity to my antagonism of, I knew I did, by now I was educated by the exorcist and by the psychic that I had done everything wrong. I had addressed it. I had taunted it. In Paranormal Witness, they had it right correct. I tied the door shut so it couldn't open the door. And it would vibrate, and then I would taunt it. And so I attributed a lot of it was mine. I wasn't sure what kind of a haunting it would be if I wasn't there. But I became very, very angry, and angry enough to start thinking seriously that, to be very frank, I thought, you son of a guns, what I'm going to do is I'll burn this damn building down. Then you don't have any place. Once those thoughts, that was my only way of getting back.
But it was almost like it was trying to get you angry so you would do something violent.
Definitely. I mean, there was no doubt. And I was, 40 years later, Dan, my tenant, we're now very, very close friends. And he said to me, he thought I was this giant angry man.
Mm-hmm.
He said, a lot of the things that went on in his apartment, he attributed to me, which wasn't true. Okay, so he had his tools missing and his tools misplaced, and he actually thought I was turning the electricity on and off. He heard the arguing, and he assumed it was me and Marcia. And, and then I had to laugh because he said, he would see me in the basement working, cleaning up, and I'd be talking to Ben. So I'd say, Ben, you bastard, you let this place go to hell. All he knew from a distance is that this big guy's talking to himself. So you start to border on insanity.
Right.
And I think that's something that today people who experience these things, one of the things I give credit to investigators for is that at least you're telling these people that there is an energy there. You're validating them and you're healing them. And it's something that Joe Dillowitz did for us. He sort of validated us. And, no, you're not going insane. But stop this and stop that and start to pray and do different things, behave differently.
Now, so what was the last straw? When did you decide, I don't care what happens, where we have to go, I'm getting out? When did that point come? And tell us about that process of leaving the place.
It was after the exorcism, and when we realized that it failed, and things everything up the notch. Activity became a little more. We started to. It actually, after the exorcism, at least it brought my wife and I closer. So no longer was I blaming her. We knew we were up against something. And I just went and I did the only thing I could do at the time. I had no rich relatives or, I was in debt. I went and got another job. And in the book, I even lie because I said I got 2 jobs. I actually got 3 jobs.
Right.
I had my daytime job, my evening job, and my weekend job. Saved up enough money, and it was just, sometimes I just thank God because I met this real estate man who said, boy, I have a bargain for you. And I told him, I said, I don't have enough money. And he said, I got a friend at the bank. At the time it was the Ravenswood Bank, and they're out of business now. So I can say that. But he said, he'll borrow you the difference, which I think was even illegal in its day. I don't think you were supposed to borrow a down payment to buy another building. But I was able to get another building, and we moved out. And with all the hopes that anybody else who lived there would be fine, or at least wouldn't antagonize them like I did. But I was up with my back against the wall. There was nothing. I get a lot of emails, and they say, well, it was unethical and blah, blah, blah. But number one, there was no disclosures. Number two, there were no national real estate companies, really.
Right.
So I was dealing with a private real estate company.
And you have to remember, you were dealing with the survival of your family. It's not like it was a day-to-day thing, and you were in a very precarious situation, so you had to do what was right for your family. And quite frankly, even if you had told somebody the place was haunted, they probably, in that era, would have looked at you like you had a third eye.
Oh, absolutely. No, they would have thought I was nuts, and they never would have represented that as a fact in selling the building.
Right.
They didn't have to.
Now, let me ask you this. After you left, no further activity?
Oh, yeah. No, our tenants...
no, I mean in your next place where you moved.
No.
Okay.
No, in fact, the first night we went to sleep in our next place was like heaven. It was like for the first time... The air was pure. There was no heavy feeling, no chills. We felt a warmth that we hadn't felt in a long time.
Now to your other point, I think you were about ready to start. That was going to be my next question. What happened in this haunted house subsequently?
Afterward?
Yes, after you left.
We had some renters, and they found out about it pretty quick. I mean, within 90 days... They asked to come and visit us, and their activity wasn't as bad as ours was. But she did say, did you ever have dishes moved? Did it ever move your broom? Did you ever have a problem? And we were honest with them, and we told them, yeah, we did. But it's benign, and not to address it. And now today, I know that in that neighborhood, there's more than one active house. So ghosts are not that uncommon in these 100-year-old buildings that had funerals in the front room.
Sure. Do you think, or did you ever, then you talked about Ben and you talked about the ghost of the old lady, the apparition of the old lady. Did you ever pinpoint it? Do you think there were multiple spirits there? Were you ever able to look back and say, I think it was this one, and this one, or was it more general than that?
No, there were definitely multiple spirits. I mean, the old woman was... when she looked, I thought she was a figment of my imagination because I'd see her on our front steps, and I'd go get my wife and say, who's this old woman? And she'd be gone. And not until one morning, Marcia was kissing me goodbye in the stairway, she appeared at the base of the stairs. And when she did that, I looked at Marcia and I said, do you see her? And she said, yeah. And she looked at us, and she wasn't frightening. She was like a grandmotherly type, I don't want to say there was kindness in her eyes, but there certainly wasn't anything malevolent. And then she walked beyond the wall, and my first assumption was she belongs to our first floor tenants. She must be a relative, staying with them. And it wasn't until that evening I found out, no, she wasn't. They didn't know anything about her.
Mm-hmm.
So...
It had to have been some kind of apparition, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. I guess, now, 40 years later, I find out I experienced what's called the Holy Grail, I guess, of apparitions, because one that sees you, I met very few other people who met apparitions where it was recognizable, where the apparition was looking at them and they were looking at it. But that's what we experienced.
Now, does the house still stand today?
Yes, it still stands today. I hope it's cleansed myself, but I really don't know. And I'm not, I wouldn't be anxious to go back myself.
I don't blame you. And that brings up a question going back. Again, this happened now over 40 years ago. What spurred you on to kind of revisit it, write the book and so forth? What kind of said, this is a story worth telling?
Actually, that wasn't even my decision. I wrote this story, and it's actually incomplete. And it's incomplete because it was written for family. It was my diary. I didn't interrogate my wife to find out everything that she experienced. I left out lots of things because I felt they were redundant. But it was written for family. And about 20 years ago, I was agented with a fiction book.
Mm-hmm.
And my agent, at a time when you had to send manuscripts back and forth,
sure,
and for electronics, He promised a couple publishers 3 manuscripts, and he only had 2. And he said to me, "Do you have anything?" I was doing some other work for him, ghostwriting and giving him more pages on certain things. He said, "Do you have anything that's 60,000 words or more?" which was the limit in those years. Today you can have a 12-page Kindle book, but in those years you had to have 60,000 words or more. So I said, "Yeah, I got this thing I wrote, I had no title." So he said, "Just give it to me." So I gave it to him. He submitted it. Both traditional publishers basically said it was worthless. They said, it wasn't scary. One of them called it too lighthearted. The other one said they would have interest in it. They liked my writing voice. They said, "But I need to have some more horrific memories." They wanted blood out of the walls. They wanted a pig face in the window. And I told Julian Portman, who was my agent, I said, "No, I can't do that. I can write fiction." I said, "But this is, to me, it's kind of sacred." And sat in a notebook, and it was passed around a couple family members. My daughters read it, and it wasn't until Kindle publishing, electronic publishing came about, and my daughter encouraged me to do some of my work, which I love fiction because I can control it. It's kinder than reality, I believe.
Sure.
But she had this manuscript, and she said, I want to publish it. And I told her initially, publish it under your own name. I don't want any part of it because I don't like ridicule and skepticism. And even though the paranormal is so accepted today, I've met people within believers and non-believers, but even the believers sometimes don't believe the other believers.
Right.
So it's a murky subject, but my daughter refused to publish it under her name. And so I gave her a mock-up of the cover, which is exactly what the cover is. It's my rough mock-up. And I said, you want it, go ahead and throw it out there. I said, I've already been told it's worthless. Has no commercial value. And it shot right to number 1 on Kindle.
Which makes me laugh because I think that's the great thing about this era, that if you have something you want to share, you can put it out there and maybe it'll be accepted and maybe it won't. But I think many things have been said, it has no value. Nobody will be interested in that. I assume 7 years ago when I started doing these shows on the internet that if I'd gone to a radio station, they would have laughed me out of the building. But, lo and behold, people enjoy the programs and we're doing it now full time. Much like your story, I think that authenticity kind of bleeds through in the sense that, people are used to things being packaged and insincere and ginned up. People want to hear the real scoop now, and it's interesting to hear it directly from someone who experienced it.
Yeah, now I know, I've got hundreds of emails, and apparently a lot of the things in my book are very common. Ghosts like to open doors and open cabinets. Ghosts like to walk stairs and make noise. So a lot of people write me and they relate, and they tell me about their stories. What shocked me is it became very big in the UK. I held number 1 in the UK for over 6 months over the summer, which is where Paranormal Witness got me because their production company is actually in London.
Yep.
So they heard about me in the UK and they came over here. And I didn't want to do Paranormal Witness. So I'm the most, you probably know, I don't advertise. I don't market. I sit here and it's all word of mouth. And I didn't want to be on TV. My granddaughters, though, when they found that Paranormal Witness was chasing me and pursuing me, they're all sci-fi nuts.
Right.
And they basically said, "Papa, you have to do this." And I did it. I kind of knew that they're not going to cram 2 years worth of stuff into 60. At the time, it was a planned 41 minutes, and then they extended it to 63 minutes. So I kind of knew they were going to make a mess of it, over-dramatize. They have to make good TV. It's not a documentary. But family-wise now, my grandchildren think that, Nana and Papa, we're rock stars. So in the end, the heck with the ridicule. My kids love it, and I'm happy for them.
Yeah, that's it's a great thing. I'm glad your story's gotten out. And one last piece before we tell people where they can find the book and they can find the website. What would you suggest? Let's say there's a young couple today, much in the place that you were in 1970 or 71, and they find themselves in a place that has something else living in it. What would be your advice, or do you have any?
Well, most ghosts are benign. So I get a lot of letters from people, and basically when they explain the activities, I basically tell them not to, I'll ask them first, does it scare you? If footsteps every now and then in the hallway don't scare you, then don't pay them any attention and don't worry about it. If you're in a place, and I've had a few letters from people where they're in a bad place, my feeling is to get out as quick as possible. And unless you're trapped with no means, and I know of one couple that is, then they have to endure it. But it's to get out as soon as possible, because it'll drive a wedge between you and your family. It'll change your emotions. It'll cause you, in my book, I didn't write about dreams because I kind of feel if you're in a bad place, you're not going to have good dreams. So bad dreams and being in a bad place are kind of synonymous. But it'll cause you awful dreams, lack of sleep. You'll be walking on eggshells at all time, wondering what's going to happen next. So it's get out, just get out.
Now, if people want to pick up on the book, and I've got to say the Kindle book is a great deal, and maybe check out your website or so forth, see other things, because I know you have more than just this one book, certainly. Where can folks go? What is your suggestion?
Amazon, of course, sells the book, and they sell the most of it, I believe, but it's actually available everywhere. My website is www.edwinbecker.com, and you'll see my other works. You'll see some comments on various things. And there's also, relative to this book, my daughter just gifted me with a terrific website called www.truehaunting.com. So it's all about true haunting. It's got a page on paranormal witness and the filming. It's done very, very well. So either edwinbecker.com or truehaunting.com.
Well, thank you so much. I certainly appreciate it.
I hope it's going to be on your website shortly.
Of course. We'll have a link up on our website and a link to this program and to your book. And we certainly appreciate your time today. We thank you for joining us on the Paranormal Podcast and for sharing your story.
Mr. Harold, thank you so much.
And thank you all for tuning in. We certainly appreciate it. Hopefully you'll have a chance to follow me over on social media. You can go to jimharold.com. All the links are there. And as well, I would encourage you to sign up for my free email newsletter. We'll talk to you next time on the Paranormal Podcast. Have a great day, everybody. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and jimharold.com